I'll remember to just add her.
Yeah, if I see her, I'll note her and bring her over from the audience if for any reason she's there.
Okay.
All right, and we are live.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Board meeting of August 5th. I'm going to begin with a roll call as this is an online meeting and that is required to get us started. Everybody on the Planning Board, please unmute yourself. Alden Clark.
Here.
Beth DeLille.
Here.
Ann Gardner.
Here.
Tanya Hartford. Leah McGavern.
Here.
Rick Tainter.
Here.
MJ Verde.
Here.
Don Walters.
Here.
Don Walters.
Here.
Thank you. Bonnie Sontag here. We also have Linda Guthrie, our note taker, and Andy Port and Caitlin, the Director of Planning Development, and Caitlin Sullivan, our planner. I'll go through the agenda first. We have one public hearing, Institution for Savings, 93 State Street, site plan review, DOD special permit. Other business, minor site plan review for 0 Parker Street, which is asked to be continued. We'll take a vote on that at the appropriate time. Other business also includes the 2020 Open Space and Recreation Plan update, a letter of support, correspondence regarding the Anna Jakes operating room expansion, and approval of our minutes from August 15th. In the section on Planning Office Subcommittees and discussion, we have potential zoning amendments, a discussion of the potential zoning amendments, section 6C, and accessory dwelling units. And then any other updates from the chair or the planning director. So that is our agenda. We will move to the first item on the agenda, which is the Institution for Savings, 93 State Street, site plan review and DOD special permit. Before we get into this, I just want to review the procedure that we're going to follow tonight. It's standard for all public hearings. And actually, before I do that, because it might be relevant for members of the public, because this is a virtual meeting, all materials are available on site. They always are anyway, but you can actually access them as we're talking about a given application. Director Port will pull up and display documents as relevant to whatever is being presented or discussed. But if you, anyone else wants to go to the city website, under government, you can click on Planning Board, where you'll see a link to the agenda for tonight's meeting. There you'll find a link to each application on the agenda and all the supporting materials. And if you're familiar with this, you know that the most recent documents are at the bottom, and then you work your way up. So in light of that, let me just go over the procedure we're going to follow for this public hearing, which is no different than any other one. We will have a presentation by the applicant. We will then hear from the public during what we call public comment. And I'll give further instructions when that, before that session opens. We will then bring it back into the planning board, and planning board members will have an opportunity to make their comments, ask questions, and interact with the applicant to the point where we have handled the agenda for that application tonight and wrap it up approprily. So with that, I will turn it over to the applicant for the Institution for Savings. Would that be Attorney Mead?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board. I'm here this evening on behalf of the Institution for Savings at 93 State Street. With me are Mike Jones, the CEO, and Kim Rock, the COO. In addition, we have Christopher Angeliakis and Shreya Shaw on the architects team from ARC Architecture. We're here tonight to talk about a new concept. Following the last public hearing, the bank has undertaken another extensive redesign of the project. The bank and its team is going to be presenting a complete redesign. The bank is working within the constraints of the existing structure on the property, the programmatic needs of the bank, as well as the related parking. The bank is also incorporating the comments they heard from the Historic Commission, as well as some members of the Planning Board, relative to the request to look at the proposed addition more as a transition to the neighborhood architecture rather than a building on State Street. These elements include wood-clad finishes rather than brick architecture of State Street in the 1871 building, varied use of materials, a complete change of massing and the scale to be more of a transition to the neighborhood while still needing to serve a commercial purpose, being sympathetic to a pedestrian-friendly experience on Prospect Street, similar to the rest of Prospect Street in Otis Place, including the activation of the building behind the street level windows. And these are among some of the changes that Chris will review momentarily. In an effort to address these changes, the bank is working from the outside in. As a result, the bank will need to change its operational program space to accommodate the exterior design changes. Also, the design we're about to present does not yet include details such as the exterior details of the corner boards, color choices, headers, and other similar design features. This is truly a concept. Nor has the design undergone a programmatic, a core services, or regulatory review to understand if it will actually work. Before these further efforts are made, however, the bank needs to hear feedback from the board. We'd like to remind the board that the design development creation is a process, and Chris will discuss with the board that design process he and the bank has undertaken. And so at this time, if you could unmute Chris, that would be great. Thank you.
I believe I'm unmuted.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to the board for hearing this again. Like Lisa said, we took a whole new, fresh look at this. What you're going to see tonight is really a result of doing some deep listening to things that we felt like we could bring design solutions to from last time we heard this at the planning board meeting. And as we walk through these, we'll highlight a lot of these things at the same time. But essentially, like Lisa said, where we wanted to start with this is to think of this part of the site as really thinking of it as a transitioning from residential towards State Street as opposed to the other way around. So that's where we've started here. We can go to the next slide. So we really did start with the plan. We wanted to relook at the plan pretty extensively, and it might not look like a big change. However, one of the things that we were really trying to solve in this new concept is to activate the street. And one of the things we heard that we thought we could solve design-wise was when you were looking at this building from the street and you looked in the windows, you either saw blank spandrel glass, or, well, you would never have seen cars, but you would see blank spandrel glass, but what you knew was behind it was parking. But what we've really tried to do is, in this yellow blocks, in this orange blocks, create actual occupiable space down on the first floor, so that when you are along Prospect Street or along Otis Place, that not only you're not seeing cars, but you're seeing an occupiable space. Now, this space hasn't been programmed yet, but our intention is to make this occupied space, that have activity in it. It has, human scale windows. You will see that when we look at the 3-dimensionals. But really, we're really hiding this parking away. And a couple of things that we've done to make this possible is we've really relooked at how to do a one-way in, one-way out of this parking area, which eliminates, I think, a big change here that you may have seen from last time. It eliminates any curb cut going onto Prospect Street or Otis Place. So the cars are coming in and out in one location, really tucked away. It's almost invisible. When we show the 3 dimensions, you can see how this has been really pulled back. It blends into the architecture in a way that doesn't call itself out as a garage door. To accomplish this, We did push out the facade to the property line, but this is very consistent with all the other houses on Prospect Street. So so our facade comes right up to the sidewalk, just as they do across the street. And you can see a little bit of how we're looking internally in the site of dealing with people getting in and out of this garage. That's a minor change to this island. I think the massing will make more sense as we start to move up. If we can move up to the next plan. Thank you. So where a lot of compromise is happening here is really the square footage of this upper floor. Right now, you're looking at just kind of blue blocks of program that we haven't decided what that program is. The yellow is circulation space, and the gray is service, just building services stuff. But you can see that that upper floor has really been eroded away. And you'll see why this is when we look at the 3 dimensions. The intention here is to start to think of this as not a building, but a series, a cluster of buildings that are all sized and scaled to look like the size and scale of the houses around the neighborhood. We can go to the next slide. We can always, please tell me if anyone wants to stop and ask questions, but I'll keep plowing through if not. These sections I think are telling in that we're cutting right through Prospect Street here, the houses on the left, into looking at the program in a couple of different places. But the key things to see here is that we're introducing pitched roofs, eave heights that are commensurate with the eave heights across Prospect Street. You can clearly see what we're intending for the mean roof height is very much the same as what's happening on the other sides of Prospect Street as well. But a key feature here is that buffer space between Prospect Street and the parking. This happens to be being cut right through the corridor that connects 2 larger spaces along Prospect Street. But that is the buffer. That is something that will be activated. It may have something worth seeing into. That this happens to be taken through a hallway, but this is a buffer in which activity could happen. Next, please. So we're going to get into looking at this more in a 3-dimensionally, and you can see as what we're trying to accomplish here. This is looking just as you turned onto Prospect Street from State. To the far right, you're seeing the original bank building. Kind of center image in the brick in curtain wall is the 1980s edition. And then we have a series of transitions that happen. Our building transitions to brick with the 80s building, and then this scheme then quickly transitions to something that's more clapboard and casement looking windows and pitched roofs. And I have to say at this point, we haven't looked into sort of the finished details of how this would be, but our intention is to be looking at very appropriate languages that happen in the neighborhood in use of same sort of head sill jam details. We may be looking at things like corner boards and eaves and gutters that are similar, but as you can see here, the intention is to start to think of this back of the site much more like the neighborhood growing onto the site. The next image, we'll just step a little bit closer, and this is a real, you start to see how the massing is starting to break down. So along Prospect Street, the long mass of the building is now broken into 2 masses that are small. If the masses look about the same size, and truthfully they're not as long as the buildings across the street. By introducing a reveal halfway down, we'll zoom in a little bit closer there. But on this image, you can see to the right, the transition from the 80s building to this building is still in brick, but then quickly transitions to clapboard. At that transition, you could probably just, you can make out just above the scale figure's head where the garage door would be. Our intention would be to have a color and texture that would blend in with the kind of clapboard style cladding. And you can start to see how this addresses the street and the and the sidewalk. The next section, yep. This is how, what I was saying, there's sort of a architectural reveal between two masses here that, two kind of what we would call house scale masses, as we're working down the street of Prospect Street, heading towards the corner of Otis Place. The windows here, the sills are at 3'6". That's where we're at right now. We think these windows are of very sympathetic size and scale. They're certainly not overscaled in my professional opinion, but they are certainly also proportional to the kind of window openings of a residential neighborhood, as you can see if you look beyond to the other residential houses that we've modeled here. The next image, please. This is the corner of Otis Place in Prospect Street. And again, the massing starting and stopping, the way the two masses come together, the way the program of the upper floor has been shrunk and eroded away, allows us to have this building, which is a single building, but it allows this building to have an appearance of a series of buildings on the site, a series of smaller buildings that have all been built in close proximity to each other. Especially at the corner, we've dropped the mass down here to really try to be sympathetic with some of the smaller scale elements on these streets. And the next image, please. Again, if you look at this image, the squint test for us was, if you were coming down the street, would you really understand a transition out of the neighborhood at this point? And I think the answer for us was no. I think we're being sympathetic to the scale, breaking things down, setting things back, letting masses be either two-story or single-story in an appropriate way. I'd like to ask Andy, maybe if you can jump back maybe 3 slides. Yeah, that one is great. Perfect. I did want to point out this loggia. That's an architectural term. It's mostly just a kind of an entryway here, and we really wanted to make sure that this new scheme, this new concept, had an apparent front door. I think it is important for the bank, and it's important for the concept of this building, that it does feel like it has its own address, its own front door, and that element not only being an element that drops the scale of the building to a more human scale as it ends, as its gable end ends, much like a residential porch would or something like that. That this element is it's calling out an entryway, but it's also being used as a scalar device. I think that takes it through what the general concept is here that we're going for, and I think we would like to, unless Lisa has anything she wants to add, I think we would want to encourage discussion on where the board feels like we're going, how they feel like where we're going.
Lisa, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm all set right now. I think that's a nice segue into the discussion.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to create use this session like we normally do for a public hearing. So I'd like to take public comment first and then have the comments from the planning board and discussion with you and Chris and anyone else who would be relevant. So if you have nothing else more to say, I'll go to public comment. Is that okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, we will take comments from the public. As we always ask you to do electronically, Andy will let you in one at a time. You must state your name and your address, and you have 2 minutes. Do I have a planning board member who would be willing to keep time? I didn't identify anybody to do that. Lee,
Bonnie,
you
I
did
can
it
bring it.
last. We do it again, thanks. Okay. what I'm going to ask everyone to do, and we will do the same thing as planning board members, is to comment only on what you have heard tonight. This is the concept design. That's what they want feedback on. That's what we want feedback on. So your comments must be limited to that, and we will be able to stay on track that way. Andy, is there anything else that I may have left out before we move to public comment?
No, thank you. As indicated on the screen, and for those who just need a reminder, the way to let us know that you'd like to speak is to just raise your hand. So use the Zoom button that says raise hand. Typically, if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, it'll appear. If you click on that, it'll let us know that you'd like to speak, and we'll go in turn down the list. With that, I guess, Chair, I'll start with the first folks we have. Jared Eigerman, you've been unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you. Jared Eigerman, I live at 83 High Street in Ward 2, but I'm speaking as a city councilor for Ward 2. I've not been involved in all of the meetings of the council, of the board or the historical commission, but I have been tracking this as an important location, not just for residents, but also for the city's institutions, of which the Institution for Savings is one of the best known. I guess all I wanted to say, I was very curious about the new drawings. I just got them, a copy of them moments ago, and now I've seen the presentation by the architect. And I need, personally, I need time to digest them. So I don't know that we're ready, or I don't want to speak for the planning board, but I'm not ready to make a judgment. I do see this as a fundamental flipping of the script, where instead of sort of matching a commercial building look from State Street down to the corner of Otis and Prospect, the idea is to start with the wood frame style and move it towards State Street. So I appreciate that. Need time to digest. Thank you very much.
Okay. The next person we have is Glenn Richards.
Hi, Andy. Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street. I'm also chair of the Historical Commission, but I'm speaking strictly, this is my own opinion tonight. The commission has not had to review these renderings or proposed plans as a group. I'll be really brief. If the question is this a step in the right direction? And that's what I think you folks are looking for. I think in general, I would have to say yes. It's, and first, we do appreciate, or at least I'll speak for myself, I appreciate the bank, its trustees and board and everyone involved with the willingness to listen to the input, to think about it, and to make such a substantial change of course. Someone commented that, why would you just try to disguise a commercial building as a residential building, and was that appropriate? And I actually have thought a lot about that, and I wouldn't think of it as kind of disguising this case. I think the architect who presented, I think the name was Chris, I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on that. But, I think he did a good job of explaining the rationale there. And even though, I was concerned when I first saw these about the being pushed up to the lot lines where it was a little bit set back before, I think the other changes do improve it. The one thing that still, I think could be taken a look at is that eave line. I'm assuming because of the nature of the car parking system, that first floor ceiling height is unusually high. So if on most of those renderings, especially the ones when you look at, let's say, Otis Place, you can see, the eave height, is definitely high. Like the distance between the first floor windows and second floor windows seems a little uncharacteristically big. So there might be something you guys can do in there, especially where you've got that buffer area that you've put in along Prospect Street. Maybe you can take advantage of that to somehow move the eave line down just a bit and, I don't know, do something creative. I'm not the architect, so I don't know, but, I've seen.
Glenn,
Yeah.
that's 2 minutes.
Yep, that's 2 minutes. All right, so I'll leave it there. So my my thanks for listening and making this bold move. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next person we have is Tim Wacker.
Yes, thank you very much for making the presentation and giving us an opportunity to speak. I'm at 13 Otis Place, about half a block from the planned project. Ms. Sontag, you had said keep our comments restricted to the redesign. So I'm assuming that the board won't be rendering any decisions tonight. Is that correct?
Correct.
Then may I be permitted to just read into the record some questions that I have and that have yet to be answered, at least to my satisfaction, and I suspect several others. And then maybe when the board is in a position to take action, those questions will be in the record, and hopefully some of the board members, if not all of them, will have some sort of an explanation for questions that are vexing me regarding this whole project. May I do that? I'll keep them quick.
Actually, we're going to have a more detailed discussion on details of the application and design at our next meeting. So tonight, we're just taking input on this concept design. If there are issues that you want to raise in general about the application, I would recommend that you save it for our next meeting.
Then I do have one point that I can make that's tangential, and that is that the redesign does nothing to address the traffic congestion issues that are inherent here. And that's my comment at this time. And thank you for giving a subsequent opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Next person is Tara Cedarholm.
Hi, Tara Cedarholm. I'm at
It's a much prettier building, so you know I feel like.
Hi, Tara Cedarholm. I'm at 20 Fruit Street, and I've been following this pretty carefully, even though I haven't spoken before. I did want to thank both the planning board for all their effort, and also the bank for taking this basically back to the drawing board. And I will say I do think, as Mr. Richards said, it's a step in the right direction. But I think there were a couple of things I wanted to make note of. One is I recall at a previous meeting that the building height was 30 feet, and it appeared that the peak of the building is 31.5 now. So I guess perhaps you're considering the building height at the edge of the roof. So I'm not sure it completely addresses the neighbors' concerns about scale and massing. And I would love to suggest the idea that a shadow study is done for those neighbors before any final decision is made. And then in terms of the design, and I know that this is just a concept, I think both the loggia and the reveal are very sort of today's moment, or kind of postmodern architecture, and really stand out maybe in a way that we wouldn't want in sort of, I know that they're trying to break up the mass, but I'm not sure that those two solutions are the right solution. I'm not advocating for a total residential reproduction, but that those two elements seem a little bit out of scale. And I agree with Mr. Richards that the windows are a bit out of scale as well. Anyway, those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Next person we have is Susan Edwards.
Unmute. Sorry, this is not Susan Edwards. I apologize. It's Colleen Turner Cicino at 15 Otis Place. I don't know why it comes up as Susan Edwards. I apologize. Anyway, the reality is this new plan is clever and wonderful, but it does not address massing, scaling, and size. And that is all we've ever asked for. I can't express more that put it on State Street or push it back. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, next person we have is Peter Mackin. Peter,
Okay,
are you
this
able to?
is Peter Mackin.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm located directly across the street from the current parking lot, 11 and 13 Prospect. My name's Peter Mackin. First of all, I appreciate the effort by the bank, and I appreciate this meeting. But as Colleen just mentioned, it's really too much for the current parking lot location. That location is smaller than what the proposed bigger, massive, higher, the scale is just off the charts. So I think it's just getting bigger and not smaller. As far as design, my house was built in 1860. This is a 2020, and it feels like a reproduction. And I really don't see the design breaking up that mass. Because you come straight to the property line, it enhances, unfortunately, the tunnel effect of a very narrow street. And all the photos or the renderings show no cars parked on the street. So I don't think it's pedestrian friendly either. It's just a long, big building that's somewhat disguised to be a house. And I don't really think it's really helps the bank's brand or image. My question would be, and we have proposed 3 or 4 other possible options, which we don't have to discuss tonight, but my question is, with City Lift, is it possible to put more of the parking underground and make this a 1-story building, 14 or 15 feet high? And so that's really all my comments for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, next person we have is Joseph Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Director Port. I would like to first thank the applicant and their designers for undertaking a rework of the addition. I think it's moving in the right direction. I think it's pretty successful in reducing the perceived scale along the street. I think that it also starts to break up masses, the overall mass. If people will remember, we're talking about a 30-foot high brick wall that was continuous down Prospect and turning up Otis. So this has very successfully broken down that scale and added a smaller element on the corner at Otis and Prospect. I think it's using some other elements very successfully that needs to be presumably refined in the next go around, but the loggia idea I think is very successful. Breaking the building in half with some element that starts to provide a house scale, I think is very successful. I think there's still some opportunity to really set that eave at the datum height of the bank, which is really 24 feet. The houses opposite are between 21 and 23 feet. Their eave line, I understand there's a challenge here because of that first floor 16-foot height in being able to juggle that eave, but I believe that there's some tricks that could be employed to deal with a higher window elevation if needed along that facade. Overall, I think this is good work, and I think it has addressed the particular concerns of materials and neighborhood context that I have been thinking about. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next person we have is Claire and I believe Mark.
Yes, yes. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And thank you very much. The presented concept plan this evening ignores details about the main issues that we've been talking about from the start. And while they've addressed certain things, they just seem to be superficial. And I would really like to see more focus on the size of this structure, the massing, and ultimately the impact. And I think we're all on the same page about impact, because if this goes through here, what's going to happen on Charter? What's going to happen on Essex Street when other entities want to expand? And I'd like the planning board to consider that because it does impact not only this immediate neighborhood, but our city, our downtown and our city. So until I see more about, really give me some more details, I'm really unimpressed. And this is a slippery slope if we approve this. Thank you.
Hi, Andy. This is Mark Griffin. Can I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I meant to address that to Chair Sontag as well.
Sure.
Yes. So, obviously this is a significant change in the plans that have been presented. But we have to consider that this has been pending for a very long time. And the plans that have been presented previously have been grudgingly changed in minor ways. And so when we finally get to this point and we see something that is suddenly not brick, we think, wow, the bank has really come around. They've made a significant change. Oh, okay, they've made a significant aesthetic change. They haven't made a significant change with respect to the footprint. It's virtually the same. The height, it might actually even be higher. We're building out, again, basically to the lot lines. I can tell you that the building wall and the pedestrian walkway that are close to my kitchen window haven't changed, although now it'll be a wood wall rather than a brick wall. So, I was heartened by the last meeting when board member Tainter, thought that the building should be brought up towards State Street. I thought that was a great idea. That to me would have been a significant change. This is more of an aesthetic change. So, I'm not on board with everyone patting the bank on the back for making wood buildings. So just because they had brick before and they didn't make many changes before. So color me unimpressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next person we have is Steve and Renee.
Yes, hi, this is Steve and Renee Charette, Steve Charette, 16 Prospect Street. We're right on the corner of Prospect and Otis, 45 feet from the proposed expansion. And I think, my neighbors have stated it well. I think Mark Griffin just really stated it well, that this is an aesthetic change, but it really isn't addressing the size, the scale, and how it's going to affect us as homeowners. The planning board, I'm grateful that there was some recognition last meeting regarding the lack of light, the lack of airflow, or how it may interrupt light, airflow, put us in the shade. And also, we're very concerned about the sound and the noise emanating from the building services equipment, which we hear now, and it's several hundred feet away. Stands to reason that with the building right on top of us, that there's going to be a substantial increase in the building services equipment noise emanating to us. So aesthetically, this is a change, but it's really not addressing our main concerns, which is the size and scale of this building. And my wife and I are very much more in favor of this expansion being on State Street. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next person we have is Richard Pollock.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay, hello, my name is Richard Pollock. My wife and I own the property at 1, 3, and 5, and 7 Garden Street, which is right in the backyard. Our backyard, the building is right in our backyard right now. And during the review, I'm concerned that I didn't see anything about what was going on in the back side of the building that my tenants would be facing. I have 9 tenants in the properties, and they're going to be facing whatever is built there. I'm also concerned about the size and the lack of sunlight, the noise from the generator that's still there. That wasn't addressed in this presentation, which I've brought up before. And the air conditioning, the water that's going to come over my property because of the roofs. So I've had backyards full of water during the spring presently. So I just think the house is, you know, the construction is just too much for the area. And it's going to take the sunlight away and everything out of my backyard. So that's my concerns. I think the bank is trying, but I think they'd be better off to go back up on State Street like a lot of people have suggested. And that's where a commercial building should be, not parking and all that in our neighborhood. And again, the traffic, you know, there's no parking on the streets at any time in this area. So that's my say. And I'd like to look at, thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, thank you. The next person we have is S. Nasir. The person identified as S. Nasir, are you able to unmute yourself? Looks like they're maybe having some problems, so we'll give them a moment. I'll go to the next person. Sean Sullivan.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, this is Sean Sullivan. I live at 9 Prospect Street. I'm directly across Prospect, the small yellow house from this development. And so my comments are, the new design is interesting, but the change, it made the issues I had worse than before. My problem has simply been the size and the massing and the shade that it casts on a south-facing house. And this has been ignored, and it's gotten worse with the height of the structure going up. The bank shows these plans next to the largest houses, not the smallest houses. My eve line is 16.5 feet. So it still only comes up to the bottom of or the middle of the structure. And a basic shade analysis shows that this is still just as bad or worse than before. And so I still have the same comments that I've had the past few times, and the same comments as some of my neighbors have said earlier. Just the size and massing and the shade have, while the exterior has changed a little bit, in my opinion, it's gotten worse. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next person we have is Anne Marie Clausen. Anne, are you able to unmute yourself and speak?
Hello, my name's Anne Marie Clausen. My husband and I and our daughter live at 3 Otis Place, and we agree completely with what Claire and Mark have said. State Street was a great idea, whomever came up with it. We are fully behind that option, and I feel as though the Planning Board and Historic Commission has been ignored regarding the massing, scale, and height. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Cindy Johnson.
Thanks, Andy. This is Cindy Johnson. I live at 99 Lime Street. I've spoken before, and I just need to add my voice to say that I'm so impressed with the bank's management and their ability to go back, hire additional architects, pursue comments that were made both by the Historical Commission and the Planning Board, and that this design has the potential to be world-class. Living in the crowded South End, you talk about transitioning to the neighborhood, that is a real transition, and I think it could be a real feather in Newburyport's cap to show just how you transition from a historic building into a historic neighborhood in a very sensitive way. That's all I'd like to share with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Looks like S. Nasir, looks like you're still having some problems unmuting yourself. Pamela Kipp. Pamela, are you there? You appear to be unmuted, Pamela, but we can't hear you. Okay, we'll take a pause there for a moment. Patricia Pecknick.
Yes, hi. Patricia Pecknick, 4 Dove Street, and I am the Vice Chair of the Historical Commission. Successful additions on historic buildings, of course, can result from very different design approaches. But what is common to buildings that meet the Secretary's standards is that the additions are subordinate. So the challenge here for me is standard 9, which requires compatibility with massing, size, scale of the property and its environment. The Secretary on page 156 of the 2017 standards, which is on the NHC website, recommends against, quote, constructing a new addition that is as large as or larger than the historic building, because it's important not to visually overwhelm the historic structure and the environment. That's why we, as an historical commission, make exceptions on standard 9 only when the large addition will be hidden on a new elevation that is not visible from any public way. The National Alliance of Preservation Commission's explication of standard 9 with regards to subordination is that the inquiry must not privilege only the view from the center facade of the historic structure, and also that the highest standards for subordination in historic districts should apply to corner lots. And that has been the practice of our historical commission, as we've consistently made clear to applicants. So to me, to satisfy standard 9, the horizontal massing of these additions can be greater than that of the historic structure if the vertical massing is lower, or the addition height can be just a little bit lower if the horizontal massing is reduced, so that the volume proportion of addition to historic building is closer to 1 to 1, 1.5 to 1, but not, as we've seen previously, 2.5 or 3 to 1. So I remain concerned with height and with overall volume.
Okay, thank you. S. Nasir, are you able to unmute yourself? Yeah, Chair, it looks like everybody's been able to speak who's expressed interest so far, with the exception of the S. Nasir, who unfortunately seems to be having an issue unmuting oneself.
Right, we will close the public comment session for this evening and move to planning board comments. And what I'd like to do is manage this as much as we can as a conversation back and forth. So when a planning board member makes comments and has questions, I'd like the applicant to respond. And they can follow up, or the next person can build on that or bring in other comments. And we'll try to go back and forth and see if we can manage this in the virtual setting. And if we start tripping over each other, we'll find another solution. But I think having heard from the public and having heard the presentation, it's time for us to have as much of a conversation as we can between individual board members and I'd suggest the applicant's architect at this point. With that said, I'll open it up to the first planning board member who would like to comment.
Nobody else is speaking. I'll take the first shot. I do think that this goes a long way toward addressing a lot of the comments and concerns that were raised at previous meetings. I do think that, I think that in contrast to the previous plan, it is much more successful in addressing the requirement of the zoning ordinance that it be consistent with the residential, adjacent residential neighborhood. Or the zoning ordinance doesn't represent or refer to residential, but it does refer to the adjoining properties within the district. And the adjoining properties within the district are all residential. So I think this has done a much better job of doing that. There is a challenge in terms of scale, but I think the new design, the new concept design goes a long way in that direction. The building is taller at the peak, but at the street line, it is much lower, I think. And the pitched roof certainly addresses some of the shadow issues that I was concerned about last time. I did a kind of a rough shadow analysis at the last meeting, and I think this would solve quite a bit of that, looking at the angle of the sun at different times of year. I do think that it has a very nice combination of traditional and modern elements. I do like the loggia idea. I'm not sure about the specific design, but I do like that idea to break up that facade and create an entrance. And I do like the way the building is divided by the reveal. And we've seen other examples of that type of architecture in the area. So I think that makes sense. And I do think that it does a better job of addressing the subsidiary or subordinate relationship of the building to the historic building, especially when seen from the State Street angle. Obviously, because it's right facing the Otis Street and Prospect Street properties, it still can't be subsidiary to the bank because it's much more in their face. But I think it does a better job. I did, at the last meeting, ask to have the idea of something similar to the library, a model similar to the library across the street be considered, but it is a tight site, and I recognize that. So to get space on the site, it may not be possible to do that. I guess a question that I have is about the one-story building on the corner. It seems odd to me, and it seems like that it might make more sense to anchor the corner with a two-story building and maybe in that way get some distance from the Otis Street abutter on the second story. But that's just a concern, a question. And just another question, the renderings show some trees on Prospect Street. Again, I question whether those trees can really be fit in there, and so whether the building is really softened as much as is suggested by the renderings. But in general, I think this has gone a long way to addressing a lot of the questions that people have, that members of the board particularly have raised. And I do appreciate I think a creative attempt to enclose a modern commercial space and yet try to be sensitive to the surrounding neighborhood.
Chris, would you like to address any of the questions that Rick mentioned in passing, or would you rather hear from more of the planning board members?
I can say a couple words about the things that are being discussed. I think, the question of scale and massing and how to break these things down, of course, has some kind of clear architectural approaches, but they can also be subjective. But I think what we did when we sat down to think of a new concept was to say that we should be looking at roof forms and gable ends and stretches of facade that are no bigger than the surrounding, some of the bit larger houses that are near it. And so when you kind of put that rule on yourself, yeah, the building does stretch out on Prospect Street enough, but we thought, if we included a reveal and included this one-story end, that we've agreed with our own rule. So if you look at this image that's up right now, the fact that you have a gable with another gable set back with a low thing in front of it does to us feel how a neighborhood would naturally progress, where not everything is built at one time and maybe additions will come on. So this is how we sat back and evaluated it for ourselves, and I agree that some people might find it odd, but I think also, what we did was took a view like this and kind of gave it a squint test and said, does this start to feel like something that would have aggregated over time? And this is where we landed for you tonight. That's not to say that there weren't other options in the pocket, but we thought this is this agreed with our approach the best.
Specifically to what Rick had asked about softening the facade with the street trees. Did you respond to that while we have it?
Yeah, it's an easy response, and we're not there yet. We need to detail out what space we really have at some of these setbacks to see where and how street trees or plantings or buffers can be implemented. I think the gentleman is probably correct that we may have too narrow of a sidewalk area at that one. There's one tree in particular, I think, in this rendering that it, could be a challenge, but certainly I've seen street trees done in a sidewalk like that, but it's a question of, is it appropriate? And I think we want to, after tonight, if we think that this is the right direction, we'll start detailing those kinds of approaches out.
All right, let's go on to somebody else on the planning board. Other comments, please?
I'll go ahead. I agree. I think this is a huge step in the right direction, and I do appreciate the bank's pivot here, because I think it really does a lot to address the transition into the neighborhood. I think I have a little list here, so I'll just go through it really quickly. I think the loggia is actually interesting. I actually like the way it's drawn. It suggests something a little fresh for Newburyport, which I find a little bit exciting. A couple other comments. It would be interesting to consider maybe perhaps some sort of a doorway on the ground floor, I think, just to, again, make it feel a little more neighborhoody. I know that may not work with your plan. I'm also interested, I also would echo some of the comments about the window heights. I know it's going to be an incredible challenge, but to the extent that you can make the window heights match a little bit better the street across the street, I think that would be it would benefit the elevations. There's something about the third building on Otis Street. All three of the buildings look identical. It would be interesting to see if they could each have a little bit more personality, or at least one of them, in particular the one on Otis Street, seems to me it should be different from the other two, but that's just an observation. I imagine you would test that. It would be also interesting to consider, given the comments about the trees and the building right out to the street, which I'm generally okay with, but it'd be interesting to consider, since you have a narrow hallway there that really isn't doing much of anything on the ground floor. And one could also argue it's odd to disguise a garage so literally to make it look like a literal residence, that it would be interesting to consider pulling that wall back a little bit, giving a little bit of more of a setback, and also in that gesture you would be reducing the peak height. It probably has impacts on your second floor, but I would suggest that as something to explore. Maybe it even goes in and out at some places. Again, that might be complicated given the parking that has to happen there, but I just throw that out there as a design thought that might address some people's concerns. I also think that this plan, given that the massing is broken up more, I think it becomes a language that's so independent from the original bank structure that I think it does a good job of contrasting with the bank. I mean, it looks like an entirely separate development. It doesn't look like an addition to the bank. So I think that is a positive argument for this concept. So in general, I think the concept is heading in the right direction. I think there are lots of little things we could talk about. I threw out a couple ideas and a couple things that I think about, but I encourage the bank to pursue this.
I'll quickly respond to just a couple of those. I think the two items that you brought up, doorway on the ground floor and the hallway issue, I don't want us to focus on the hallway so much. The hallway is actually connecting two areas in the plan where real program can happen. And of course, if we continue with that concept, there will certainly be a doorway on the ground floor where there is a real entry point. So hopefully we can move forward with this concept and prove out that's worthwhile. I think we here on the team here feel like there's some upsides to really keeping that street active and not making the quote unquote dead facade that I think we heard very well from the previous critiques. The window heights, of course, is a game of last time we heard that the windows were out of scale, and they were tall, but this is the game of scale, right? If you stretch them too high so they feel like the space in between a first story and second story window is diminished, then the critique comes to you that your windows are too big. The windows here are I would say, I think we could argue very well that they're residential size. As far as how the windows are across the street, of course, we're across the street from 3 or 4 buildings, so the window heights pop up and down a lot. The 3 that are multifamily, their sills are actually quite high. They're higher than I think we would want on a street, on a building that has a ground floor entry. Their sills are up around 5.5 feet. And then their heads are somewhere in the 11-foot range. Our heads on the first floor really only come up to about 10. And our sills are at 3.5. We certainly hear that and would be willing to push those up because we do have the space to, and maybe there's some interesting variation in architecture to do that. But I just wanted to kind of speak the architectural scale challenge. It's hitting that perfect target of size versus scale. I think we'll do the best we can to make it comfortable, but I think this is a good start.
Okay, we'll hear from another planning board member. Thank you, Chris.
I'm happy to go next, MJ. I think I would agree a lot, or most of the comments from Rick and Leah. I would add in just a couple of my own. The image that on Otis, I'm going to take off on Leah's comment about a door. I mean, you'll need a second means of egress at some point, and the facade on Otis that to me looks like an extra large infill. So the 3-story peak next to the 1-story corner piece, it just feels out of scale. And maybe referring back to what Leah said, it's like part of the same development. Maybe that is a place where we have a change. It looks like the back of a building because does not have an entry. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity there. And it just feels like it's really overwhelming the house with the gambrel next to it. I guess I would also just question about what the woman's name from the Historic Commission, who I don't recall her name, but talking about the addition being subordinate. And the scale still feels a little large to me. And I do question if there's real numbers that relate to that. I obviously haven't done the math, but is it really subordinate? I mean, it's still a big structure. As much as I really commend the bank for flipping completely and going to something that's much more contextual and fits into the neighborhood, I think it's still large. And I guess the eave line, I do feel like it could come down a foot or two on Prospect. And I think those are pretty much all my points to make. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, would you like to respond to any of that?
Sure. I think some of these are repeat comments. I think the Otis Street corner is going to get a lot of attention here. I think we can discuss further what can be done. I think I've already spoken why we think that was a good approach. There are other ways that we can think about. However, you know, I would still stick to our guns a little bit. I mean, the way it's rendered, of course, is more fungible. You know, does it look one way or another? Does it look like something additive, or does it look like something that is an extended part of a larger form? I think we can study that. The scale being subordinate, you know, it's hard for me to speak to that. We've done everything I think we can to make it subordinate. I mean, the bank has a program they're trying to achieve. The program generates a parking count that they are trying to achieve, and that results in a floor space that needs to be achieved. And given those givens, you know, I think we believe in this approach that it is as subordinate as possible. And that I think that's about as far as and the rest of that is a little bit more subjective. Eve lines, I think I would refer to our sections to discuss eve lines. Right now, especially in a conceptual design approach, eve lines are being set for us to have some ability to develop the building structurally and all those things without hamstringing us and having to come back and raise them later. I mean, I think we are extremely comfortable that this eve line, which is quite similar to the adjacent eve lines of the three multi-stories across the house, makes some sense. And so, you know, I think we can, as things develop, look and see if we can sneak some of that down, sure. But starting here, I think is a good place, because things just get tighter and harder as we get into development. But that's about as much as I can say about the eve lines.
Okay, I'll take another planning board comment, please.
Bonnie, I can go ahead. I agree with a lot of what has been said before. So I don't want to repeat all of that. I do think this is a good step. Like MJ, I do still think the scale is a bit large. I would like to see, you know, once it's further along, a view from the front of the bank. I know that that's not the only view we should be considering in determining whether the new addition is subordinate to the historic building, but I do think that would be helpful, a street level view where we could see all of it and see how it all fits together. I do wonder if it's possible, you know, the architect mentioned the numbers for the parking are sort of driving some of the scale and size of this, and I would just encourage the bank to consider whether there are any other possible configurations, whether using the lift or, you know, maybe having some off-site parking where they could pull the building in a bit or lower the roof height just to, you know, cut down on the scale a bit. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your comments. I think it would be nice. Well, I wanted the board to hear that these images that we're showing are from a live model. I mean, we you know, our process is to do things perceptually and three-dimensionally all the time, and back into the two-dimensional drawings once we've solved the three-dimensional problem. So as far as getting views from anywhere, we can certainly show any board member any view from anywhere if they choose. So we can make those available. Certainly if we speak next time, that we can make sure to get you the views that you want to see. In other planning boards that we've gone before, we've actually been able to drive the live model so that can be done in real time. I would encourage this board to consider that in the future as well. It's a very helpful tool, and it lets you know that we're not hiding anything, because we're not. It's built into a model, and you know, if there are rough, you know, if there are rough parts, you're going to see them. So I would encourage you, the board, to consider that in the future. The parking configurations have been studied exhaustively. So there's a lot of code driving this, things that we are and are not allowed to do by Massachusetts State Code. I think to this point, the parking counts are what they are, unless some crazy variance happens. But I think what we're trying to do is be very responsible and follow the rules as they're written, and make those parking counts work as they are prescribed. So I think that's it for me on this comment.
Okay, we'll go back for further planning board member comments, please.
Bonnie, I'm happy to take a shot at this. I'd like to kind of go over some of the points my fellow planning board members made. If for no other reason, the applicant eventually needs to have, for the special permit, 6 positive votes. So I just want to be sure they know where I stand on some of these. Perhaps I could take the State Street location. I think having it on Prospect is better than State. I spent a reasonable amount of time today on State Street, walking back and forth, looking where the facility would be, the building would be. And I've come to the preliminary finding that the building is generally remote from the historic or separate from the historic building. First from the distance and the addition that was placed, and secondly, the trees that are on State, and also the part of Prospect Street, you know, where the drive-through is, et cetera, are very large. That may bring up a question in the future, is what happens if those trees become diseased or whatever. But for the time being, I think there is a fair amount of separation. I know Ms. Pecknick also mentioned the subordination, and I've taken a look at the U.S. Secretary of Interior standards, and perhaps in fairness to everyone, I'm going to take a section, and I don't think it's out of context, but I just want to throw this out. I don't know the particular page number, but it says for a new addition to historic structure, it says recommended. It says, as Ms. Pecknick said, ensuring that the addition is subordinate and secondary to the historic building and is compatible in massing, scale, materials, relationship of solids to voids and color. Then it says not recommended, and I just wanted to, this I found interesting myself. It said, constructing a new addition that is large and or larger than the historic building, which seems to be fairly factual. And then I think the key point in my opinion was comma, which visually overwhelms, i.e. results at the diminution or loss of its historic character. So because I think of that prepositional phrase where it says it would have to really take away from the historic one, because of where it's located on the property, I personally don't see that happening. If we now go on to the important issue with many of the abutters, is how does this look on Prospect and or Otis /Garden? I do agree. I do like it closer to the street because I think it's consistent with the houses that you see on the streets I just mentioned. And I do think that having a gable type of roof, whatever, is similar to the architecture of the other houses there. And I think it's similar to what we've done in some buildings where we said more of a commercial building, we have step backs, 5 floors or 4 floors on the side. So when you look at it, so I do think it softened a bit from before. And I do appreciate the suggestion because one of my comments I had here was architectural 3D. I'd like to see some renderings of something with a closer view. All those perspectives are very far away. And when I was at the corner today of Prospect and State, the buildings look different from your eyes, your focal length, and what this perspective is. So I think by the suggestion of the architect that we have some type of a walkthrough is extremely helpful, and I surely would encourage that. I'll defer to the others with respect to some of what I consider the details, and not that they're unimportant, but the windows, the heights, and et cetera. I think the other point I would make, which I think is the elephant in the room that's been mentioned, is people will say the scale, does that mean height, width, et cetera. I think my sense is that people are concerned about the height. Yeah, they like it a little bit less from the property line. And in my opinion right now, my preliminary thought is that it's either a 1-story or 2-story building at the end of the day. And so at this point, I'm inclined to be in favor of the general height that's there as compared to a 1-story building with a slope roof or whatever. Thanks, Bonnie.
Anything to comment on there, Chris?
No, I mean, of course, I appreciate the look at it and in the way that you are seeing this. I think we agree on a number of these points that were made. I will talk a little bit about the images we've shown. We show all of our image at 60 degree, which matches sort of an eye, in human eye. So we do the best we can to put these cameras views as if you would see them if you were standing on the street. But again, nothing can beat it if you're actually kind of driving around this thing in real time and seeing how each of these things interact with each other. I appreciate the scale versus height thing. I think scale is sometimes used for the word big, but scale is a proportional thing. And this is something that we work really, really hard at getting scale right. What we're doing is trying to mitigate between the scale of a neighborhood and how to be subordinate with a significant historical building. And I appreciate that it sounds like that you feel like we're getting there.
Good. Okay. Sorry, who's next? Tanya?
Bonnie, I can talk. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had some technical issues, so I may have missed some of Leah's comments. So sorry if I repeat those. I think overall, I think personally, I'm not a fan of fake residential in a commercial building, like where it looks like a residential building when it's actually commercial. But I understand sort of the reasoning behind this, and I think that there does seem to be some comments in favor of this being a better scale from what some of the people were looking for. So I think that, and I do personally like the clapboard. I think it softens some of the brick, and I like the fact that some of the planes are broken up, so you don't just have a large brick wall. So I think I do like that. I'm curious if the pitched roof, if that, does that, how much is that raising the roof height from what you had when you had the flat roof? And does that reduce the shadows that you're casting onto the street or not? I'm curious on that. Do you want me to ask all my questions,
sorry.
Bonnie, or do you want to have a back and forth?
No, back
Chris,
and forth.
you can go ahead and answer that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let me answer a couple of those. So the pitched roof, I would simply refer to the section. I think that kind of answers where we were, or where we are now. And so the answer is, you know, last time there was a 2-story flat roof building. So clearly the peak of this gable is higher. The eave height is generally in the same place as where we were, if not a little bit lower than the previous proposal. And the question is, does it change the shadows? And the answer is no, it doesn't. The shadow casting of a 2-story building, whether it's pitched roof or not, is generally the same because of you know, to be scientific about it, when the sun is super low in an evening or on a morning, yeah, the shadows lengthen, but when you get into mid-morning or late evening, they're essentially the same.
Okay. The other question I had was, I feel as if having a single-story building on the corner of Otis and Prospect seems a little weird. It just seems like out of scale. Just to have a single-story building there. There's not really any single-story buildings in this neighborhood. But that being said, I wonder if you if it could look, if you are going with this like fake residential, if you took that 1-story building and moved it over to you know, flipped it so that way you had the 2-story building on the Otis and Prospect, you know, sort of really mounting that corner, and then had that single-story structure next to the smaller house, next to Mark's house there, and whether that would change, whether you'd be able to do that from a design perspective. So then it looked like almost like an accessory building or an addition to this fake house look that you have going on at Prospect and Otis Place. It's just a comment. I was just thinking, it seems out of place where it's at right now, in my mind.
I mean, I think the best we can do is take that as a suggestion, and,
yeah, that was just a suggestion.
And look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I will, you know, just to give you a 1-second design speak about it, is, you know, if we were to do that, we'd be looking at a very long stretch of taller building on Prospect Street, and we were trying to do the best we could to balance the Prospect Street issues with the Otis Place issues. And right now, I think we're agnostic of which one is more difficult to solve.
Right.
So this is, I would say, this is the balanced scheme. This balances Prospect with Otis in the best we could for this meeting. And like we did last meeting, we'll take these comments to heart and see if something emerges out of it.
Okay. And then my other question, and this is not something I think you or not question but comment, is it seems like there is still a neighborhood concern on the massing and the scale, and it seems like some of the massing and scale is coming from the fact that there is so much parking that is in this site, which is, it's an unusual amount of parking for a downtown commercial building. And it you know, and I wonder if there's an option to reduce the parking and to do some offsite parking, and could you then reduce the scale and the mass? And I know that would be another redesign, but I know I, for one, would be supportive of offsite parking. And I guess that the neighborhood in some ways, I guess, would have to think about, is that a trade-off, if there is a trade-off there? You know, could you reduce the scale and massing if you were able to do offsite parking, and would the neighborhood be okay with that? Because I know initially they were concerned about not having enough parking, but I think in the end, I almost feel like maybe we have too much parking, possibly, that we're trying to fit to meet zoning requirements. So that would be just a comment. And then my last one, I guess I would agree in some ways with Don, where I think that this is an appropriate location as opposed to being on State Street. I question in some ways with whether this would be considered an addition when you look at the Secretary of standards, or whether, because it is such a separate structure, and it's so far away from that historic structure that I wonder if it sort of has to follow those same scalability requirements that are recommendations that the Secretary of Interior standards state. And that would be just my personal opinion, is that I think being back on this part of the site actually makes it, gives more prominence to that historic structure. And in some ways, I see this more as an addition to the 1980s edition as opposed to an addition to the historic structure. So, so that's the way that I've been looking at it and analyzing it from my personal perspective.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just want to, Andy, if you could go to the section, I just want to address Tanya's initial comment relative to the height of the first proposal versus, or the last proposal versus this one. So the height of this one to the eave is 25.5, yes, 25.5. And the height to the eave line or the parapet was 29.8. So that gives you the idea of where this eave line versus the parapet was before. It's 4 feet shorter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we're ready for Tanya, you're finished, correct?
I'm all set, yeah, thank you.
Great. Let's move to another planning board member, please. We haven't heard from Anne or Anne. Would you like to speak?
Here I am. I guess I really do like the change in focus on the design very much. My only continuing disappointment simply reflects all the comments we heard from the neighborhood relative to, size and massing. And, I think the architect has articulated, how to fit program requirements and zoning requirements, et cetera. I just wish there could be a solution to that. Maybe Tanya's idea about the parking might have provided something. I don't know if it's too late for that. So yes, I very much like the redesign. But I'm sorry that the neighbors are still, unhappy with this in their neighborhood.
Thank you, Anne. All right, let me comment first for myself. I do believe this is moving in the right direction, and I'm glad Anne brought that up, and there have been some allusions to that from other members about the size of the whole, or the effect and the impact on the neighborhood of this addition, that while it visually is trying to fit in, is still a big change from the parking lot, an open parking lot, and I appreciate that. Whether it could be made to be more amenable to neighbors with a different design, we haven't seen that yet. And I appreciate that the bank has certain requirements for how it wants to use the building and the number of employees they want to have on this site. And the city so far has required that you have all your parking on site. And that forces the massing and the scale that we're seeing. I do believe that from the concept design, we've seen some indication that when we get more details, that sense of a big thing in your neighborhood is going to be a little bit adjusted. I think you've taken on some ideas from other members that you're going to consider. I want to add to that, has to do with the windows. I'm not sure in any of our discussions yet, we've talked about how these windows looking into the garage are going to look from the street. Now, I think that's the first question I have for Chris. Is the new design meant to cover up the garage as the previous windows were going to open into it? And if that's the case, how do you get ventilation into the garage?
So the design intent of the windows is that you're looking into occupied people space only. there would be no windows that open visually to see anything that looks anything remotely like a garage. That's the design intent of this proposal. Where it truthfully, it was the design intent of the previous proposal as well, except those windows would have been spandrel glass, something that was not, you couldn't see through, but still looked like glass. These will be true windows that look into true program space. That's our design intent. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And the ventilation issue is something that is a technical issue that we're now going to have to solve. On a number of other projects, we've done ventilation through the garage door. We've had perforated garage doors that are, I mean, you would never see the perforations from within 20 feet of it. So there are technical solutions that are very low profile that you don't see, that you don't hear. And we will undertake finding the right solution for ventilating that garage. You know, this is not something we haven't dealt with on other projects, and we feel like we can do it pretty elegantly.
Okay, that's reassuring. But I'm also concerned, as other people have mentioned, about the noise in general. I guess that will come in the more of the detail. So I'd like you to consider as much auditory buffering as possible for any of the mechanicals having to do with this building. I heard at least one neighbor talk about being quite far away from the existing mechanicals and being able to hear them today. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, because I was curious about it as well, is could you speak to the view, even in the conceptual design, from Garden Street?
Yeah, I can. The view from Garden Street would be broken up into two masses as well. So as you see, the connection to the 80s building is a brick mass that then transitions to a house-scaled gabled mass with another reveal separating the two, so that from the backyards of the people on Garden Street, they're not looking at one long, you know, featureless brick facade, but then they would be looking at a whole series of buildings that are generally the same scale as their house. That's, again, the design intent. The design intent is to make this feel like a cluster of house-sized buildings, so that, you know, if you're in your backyard, it's not a surprisingly large thing that you're looking at. You know, from some people's backyards, there might be a brick facade. In some people's backyards, they'll see something that's more clapboard. That is, and there's also a garden fence. You know, it's what, 6 foot tall garden fence that separates those properties. So we'd really be talking about what does the upper floor of these buildings look like, and you know, they will look like in the wood clad portion, they would have very much residential windows that are activated by whatever the program is going on up there. And then the brick may have a different style of window, but generally the same scale, and they would also be activated by what's going on inside the building there too. So they're not dead facades, they are active, you know, and you know, in general, the same approach that we're taking on Prospect and Otis is what we're taking on the Garden Street side, which is break this into multiple pieces, so it doesn't feel like one large, undifferentiated thing. I will make one comment about the acoustics. With the addition of this buffer zone, I mean, this is what we call it in the plan. If Andy, if you could go to the ground floor plan real quick, I think it's slide 3. Thank you. That yellow zone and orange zone there is about as good as a acoustic buffer as you could ever get on Prospect and Otis from there, because it's 2 walls that would be, you know, acoustically dense, and in space in between, which is even better. We would endeavor to make sure that all the enclosing walls around it are very acoustically solid, including proposing possibly not having any windows at all along the Garden Street property line. And to say that is to say that we heard in previous meetings that acoustics is an issue, and I would say that this scheme is quite an improvement to that, just by the adding of space. I mean, the people who may be occupying whatever rooms end up down there are going to be, you know, they're going to be more acoustically, they're going to be closer to the noise that might happen in the garage than anyone around the street. The mechanical noise, we have an opportunity with this scheme that if you look at this section, I think that's 2 slides next, we have the opportunity of placing some of the louder things. And I don't think many of the things we have loud, but in between the gables, we actually have quite a nice area here. Yes, thank you very much. To place some of those things there, which would be acoustically shielded from either side of the building. So again, this is conceptual design, and we're talking about high, you know, very conceptual, high level stuff. But you know, when we're designing something like this is what we're thinking of where things like a fan might be able to go on the roof or something like that.
Madam Chair, if I could just follow up with what Christopher had earlier said. They design by a 365-degree live model, and we have that available. And hopefully at the next meeting, when there are more details, perhaps the chair and the board will work with the planning director to allow that live model to be used and shown, which every single one of these views can be seen from.
Okay, we'll take that into consideration. Thanks for the reminder. I just wanted to say 2 other items about the conceptual design. I too like the idea of more of a modern entrance, good historical development within new development in historic areas is good to have some reference to the historical, obviously, but as has been stated, we don't want everything to look like a replica, and then you can't tell the difference between what's really old and what's more modern. So I like the idea of the loggia and the kind of entryway there. And I'm also beginning to think that the issue of subordination of this addition is more one of visual than actual dimensions, and I think we need to take that into consideration when we look from State Street, which is where the historic building is located. And the whole idea, I believe, behind the subordination of an addition is not to overwhelm the existing historic structure. And given the distance away from it, and the relative sizes of the two, it would seem, and this would be really important to see from State Street, that the historic structure and the space around it has been preserved. And I hope the Historical Commission will help us on that, to understand where we can, as one member, I think, was mentioning, trying to deviate from those standards in a literal interpretation and look at this as the unique site that it is and try to understand how we are meeting those standards and meeting the requirements of all of the zoning that controls this project to help make it work. So that leads me to thinking about the next iteration. We definitely are interested. I think from what we've heard from all planning board members, correct? I think so. I don't hear anybody screaming that I've missed you, so I guess we've all spoken. We're looking forward to seeing more details to both what you've been planning and what you've heard tonight. And Chris and I believe Attorney Mead have probably been taking notes. I know Attorney Mead is very good at that. And if I'm correct, could I ask for your list of issues or design features based on tonight's discussion that you will be looking to either consider or incorporate into the next iteration?
Bonnie, Lisa, I have a significant list, and I have been taking very detailed notes. Do you really want me to go through all of them?
Well, I want to make sure that you've hit the high points of not only what the planning board has mentioned, but if at all possible, to consider the neighbors' concerns as well. In fact, we reflect both the need to balance the desires of the applicant, the immediate abutters, and the community as a whole. So I don't mean to give short shrift to the comments of the neighbors, even though some of them may be more extreme than you feel you can accommodate. I just want to make sure that your list is dealing with the major issues that have been brought up tonight. Could you summarize them by any chance?
I can, and I certainly took as many notes on the neighbors' comments and also members of the Historic Commission's comments as I did the board's comments. So kind of starting from the top, you know, I'm going to do a kind of the size, scale, massing comments from the neighbors, but in addition, particularly from some of the Historic Commission members, the relationship of the eave line and the distance between the windows on the first and second floor. There have been some comments related to the differentiation between the buildings, perhaps maybe by using color and detail, and potentially adding some elements like doorways on the first floor at appropriate places. There have been comments related to the windows and their placement. There have been issues related to looking again at the Prospect Street sidewalk. There's comments on both sides of this, but there was some comments related to potentially where, if any, of the landscaping is going to be able to be fit in. Again, I'm just looking down my list. There's some comments on the gable end and the height, the need for a shadow study, which we're happy to provide, a discussion about the acoustics. I know Chris has addressed that, but I think that we're going to be able to provide some more actually engineering information related to the acoustics, specifically the operations of the garage, which are now, as Chris noted, more muffled, if you will, if there was any noise to begin with. And then the location, will be taking care in the location, the mechanicals, which is, you know, we haven't even gotten to yet related to the design. So again, we talked about the entrances, and I think those, you know, breaking up the planes and the colors and the details, we have some of those things to work on. I think that in general, those are without going through every single person's comments, those are the bigger ones.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the planning board members and ask if you think of the big issues, would you add to that list? Other than the request for the 3D model technology to see all of this in more realistic views.
I'll add, the only one I didn't hear Lisa directly address was the corner of Prospect and Otis, and the question as to whether or not a 1-story should be there.
Okay, yep, the location of that breakup, yep, got it. We have that. So Madam Chair, there was a suggestion in the staff report that we might ask for continuance to your next meeting, but I would suggest that we need a continuance at least until September 16th at this point, and we'll be in touch with the planning director if we'll make that meeting, but I would request a continuance to September 16th.
Okay, that seems to make sense. So is there any further discussion before I take a motion for a continuance? All right, I will ask for a motion, please, to continue to
Also
September
moved.
16th. Don moves. Yeah, Don, thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. MJ.
Thank you. And before we take the vote, let me just reinforce that the continuance date must include, of course, time for the Historical Commission to put on its agenda and hear and review your detailed design before we get it.
We understand that. And at this point, we're going to shoot for September 16th, knowing that. But as I said, depending on how we progress through this, because we also have to work on the site plan and make sure that that's all working. And as we've talked about before, the internal operations and the core of the building. So we'd like the continuance to the 16th, understanding all of those obligations, and we'll be in touch with the planning director and our ability to meet that.
Okay, great. All right, I'll take a roll call then on continuance to September 16th. Beth?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Leah?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
MJ?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. And, oh, Alden?
I
is
abstain.
abstaining. Yeah, okay. So thank you very much, and we'll see you when we see you, if not on the 16th at a date to be determined.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the board.
All right, that's our only public hearing for tonight. We move on to our next agenda item, which is a minor site plan review for 0 Parker Street. It's been continued since 7/1, and they've asked for a continuance to September 19th, which we'll take right now because we have no reason not to. May I have a motion to continue it?
I'll make a motion to continue.
Leah makes the motion, and a second.
I'll second.
Anne, I heard Anne first, sorry. Anne will second it.
Can I just,
And-
Bonnie,
Excuse
I
me,
think
one
you
thing.
said
You-
September.
Go
I
ahead,
meant
Beth.
September 19th.
No,
Yeah, it says
16th.
August 19th.
Request to continue. Oh, 8/19.
Yeah, and I think the next meeting is September 16th, is that right?
Where are we? No, there is,
We have a meeting on the 19th of August, but so is that what they want, or do they want September 16th?
no, I guess they want August. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. It's August.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Motion to continue to August 19th. We had a motion from
Yes, Leah.
Leah and a second from Anne.
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. Alden,
I abstain.
Beth,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. So that'll be August 19th for that minor site plan review. All right, the next one is the 2020 Open Space and Recreation Plan update. That's for Andy.
Yeah, thank you. We apologize it's on the agenda. We don't actually need to further discuss it unless the board members have questions. This plan has now been submitted to the state for review. We're waiting for their comments back. They might have a few tweaks, but it's all in good format and order for them based on the requirements they outline in good detail. So the only question at this point is whether or not the city council has any changes or comments, and they have it in committee, the Planning and Development Committee of the City Council. So we'll have one or more meetings with them to go through that, but we're not expecting to need anything else, from the planning board for this, unless members have questions.
Okay, we'll move right on to the next item, which is correspondence from Anna Jake's operating room expansion. You want to just tell us about their phased approach?
Yeah, so members got a copy of the materials that were provided, and actually those were also provided to the city council. So they wanted to let us know that based on, I think in part on the COVID situation and their need to adapt, they are phasing in the construction that the planning board had approved and the city council had approved there. I'm not sure if planning board members have any particular concerns or questions about that. I know that Rick in particular had looked in on those plans, maybe in more detail. I'm not sure if anybody has any particular questions. I don't think I saw any particular issues with that myself. But I think the hospital is trying to make sure as good neighbors that, the city council, the planning board, and everyone involved could know, how they were going about things. So no one was surprised if they saw, phased construction versus everything all at once.
Rick, did you have something you wanted to?
Just a question for Andy. The request, the correspondence was a little bit vague, I thought. I mean, theoretically, they could do the first phase and then come back in 10 years to do the second phase, unless I missed something. So I'm just wondering if there's any time limit on this.
Yeah, I think that really comes down to case law. So I think, if we see someone who's extending beyond a 2-3 year period for doing the construction of this project, then we're going to be back into a question of whether they need to come back and get a formal extension from the planning board versus having to refile again. So I would not say that they have the opportunity to go 10 years to do that. For instance, your permits call out a 2 to 3 year period. If we were seeing them go beyond that, we would direct them to come back to you, ask for an extension or refile in order to have valid permits to continue doing, the remainder of the construction.
So that would be, I was wondering about that. So I looked at the approval and saw there wasn't a time limit, but you're correct. The building permit, you have to complete that within a 2 year period, correct? So that would be the guiding piece, right?
Yeah. We would consider that to be essentially, at that point, they'd be abandoned the project and they, unless they had gained a extension through the board, timeframe extension from the planning board, we would tell them they'd have to go back and refile again.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, good. Thank you for the update on that. And I like the comment that they're being good neighbors because they really are. And we can use this as an example for future reference. Approval of the minutes for 7:15. Let's take a motion and then see if there's any discussion. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as amended.
Okay, that's Rick. And second?
Second, Ann.
Ann, thank you. And amendments, I've made some changes that are pretty much grammatical and clarification. Rick or Don, who also I know have looked at it, or anyone else want to make any comments about their requested edits?
I think it's all clarification. Oh, I would like to comment, though, that I like these minutes with the members identified by name. That's very helpful.
Good. Anybody else want to comment on them? Okay, I'll take roll call on approval. Alden?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Tanya?
I was not at the meeting, so I abstain.
Thank you. Leah?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Leah, were you at that meeting?
No.
You're abstaining. All right. Thank you, Tanya. You woke me up on that one. Okay. We got Rick. MJ?
Yes.
There. Yeah. Don?
Yes.
And Bonnie, yes. Okay. Minutes are done. Thank you, Linda. All right. We now have further discussion of section 6C. And we have some bullet points requested. We've requested a draft, even rough, on the accessory dwelling units to see where there might be overlap. That's not ready yet, so you were given as part of the staff report some bullet points. And Rick very kindly pulled out bullet points to be consistent on 6C so that we can just talk about them conceptually and not get lost in the weeds of the language. And I think one of the major questions we probably ought to start out with, if you don't mind jumping around, was an idea I think that Don brought up, the concern that applicants could go for a 6C, and we wanted to avoid the situation where an applicant could go for a 6C for 2 full-scale units on a lot and then come back for an accessory dwelling units on each one. And because we don't have the new ADU amendment yet, we've got language proposed for the 6C that would restrict that. Does that work for everybody for now?
Bonnie, would it be restricting ADUs completely on those, or and I guess my only concern is that, you know, the ADU, I think part of the reasoning on that for us to pass that is to allow for some more affordable type of units, and would we by eliminating it altogether, are we sort of eliminating the possibility of maybe some instances where it would make sense and it would allow us to provide some units that could be affordable?
Well, I think, and Rick, you've thought through this, and Andy as well. I think the idea is that the ADU amendment, when it comes through, will do exactly what you're saying. And that will be the major vehicle for getting more affordable, market rate, affordable units out there. That the 6C would remain more having a second subordinate, but second dwelling unit on one lot. Is that the idea?
Bonnie, just for the office anyway, I'll just say that we weren't necessarily assuming that the 6C would need to preclude accessory dwelling units. I think Tanya's made a valid point that, you know, you may just as well want to have little a accessory units, you know, there if that results in more affordable units, even if they're not deed restricted. I don't take any particular stand from that, but I'm not sure that it's necessary to restrict it on 6Cs. It could be a large lot where 6C is proposed, and maybe that additional dwelling unit isn't, you know, necessarily having an impact of any kind. But that's up to you and, you know, and the city council in terms of what you want to zone for. It's just, I'm not sure that that's something that the office felt was necessary as a restriction.
Well, that's actually incorporated into the rough draft that Rick, you wrote up, where you could convert another building, but it would be restricted in size.
Yeah, so I think that this kind of just shows again the difficulty of trying to fix 6C without also doing accessory dwelling units at the same time. And as we talked about at our last discussion on this, I think we're just going to have to accept that this is only going to be the first pass on 6C. And once we see what the accessory dwelling unit proposal is, then we can adjust the 6C to be compatible with it. I personally don't have ultimately in the long run, I don't have a problem with an accessory dwelling unit internal to a single family dwelling. The single family dwellings on a 6C development. So in other words, if we had 2 single family dwellings on a lot, I wouldn't have a problem with a completely internal accessory dwelling unit. I would have a problem with 2 single family dwellings and 2 detached accessory structures also having accessory dwelling units. And so I think once we see what the ultimate accessory dwelling unit proposal is, whether it includes detached accessory dwelling units as well as attached accessory dwelling units, we may want to look at how that works. But I think I would say until we know what the accessory dwelling unit proposal is, we just kind of exclude them from the 6C, and then we can add them back in once we see what the accessory dwelling unit proposal is. That would be I'd prefer to be doing it all at once, but if we have to do it sequentially, that would be the way I would propose to do it.
Yeah, this is Andy. One other thing I would add to that is, again, I realize there's some interest in some overlap in some of this subject area, but I'm not necessarily convinced it's necessary to have the accessory dwelling unit ordinance in order to finalize what particular changes the planning board thinks are appropriate to the 6C section. You can, even as a planning board, if you're issuing the 6C special permit, if you feel that it's that big of an issue, you can actually place a condition on the 6C special permit that no accessory units can be added in accessory structures, or no accessory structures can be added without coming back to the board, because remember that the site plan involved with the 6C is part of that approval. So I guess my point is just that you have the ability to restrict that if you feel it's necessary, and you can, if you want to propose to the council to adopt a change to the 6C section now that, as you pointed out, Rick, would restrict the accessory dwelling units if they're later allowed by the council in some other ordinance amendment. And then, as you pointed out, go back and allow it again. But it's not that you couldn't restrict that additional accessory structure in some way by virtue of the special permit you're already imposing on the property when they come in for permitting.
But this is Bonnie. If you do that, you're just talking about amending the existing one. We're talking about revising the whole 6C right now, and that how we handle accessory dwelling units is part of that concept. I don't think any of us from our previous discussion wants to just tack on some stuff to the existing 6C. Have I got that right, everybody?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I think the bullets that were developed were well done and reflected our last conversation.
What was I'm trying to pull up the bullet point list right now. I thought I had it printed out. What was the bullet on ADUs what was the bullet point regarding
Bonnie,
that?
do you want me to summarize some of that?
No, we just
No.
No, I'm trying to pull it up right now. But I guess from my perspective, I mean, I'm kind of with Andy. I feel like if we are revising it, I would be more apt to leave it open, not prohibit ADUs on 6C properties, but instead sort of give us the discretion on deciding whether it makes sense or not, because there are some areas where it may make sense and there's some that it's not. I agree, Rick, that it probably would be more sense that they would be attached as opposed to detached. But I guess, does that mean that if a 6C property with a garage wanted to put an ADU on top of the garage, is that considered a detached, or is that considered a detached ADU?
So
only if the garage is attached.
Right. But I think that the way we've talked about the see, this is, again, right now there's no such thing as an ADU, right? It's only an in-law apartment. Right. There is no such thing as an ADU in Newburyport. So the way we've drafted or thought about the 6C is to say that 6C could allow 2 residential dwellings on a lot. So if you had a detached garage and you wanted to convert that to an ADU, that would by definition violate the 6C, because then you'd have 3 residential dwellings on a lot. So, again, it's how we, if we decide we want that in the future, if we decide we want to have an apartment on top of a garage, we can do that. But it wouldn't work with the language we're talking about right now. You'd have to go back and rewrite the 6C to specifically say, oh, by the way, we won't count an apartment in a garage as a residential structure. So I think
we could just go back and amend. We could,
right.
I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that would be fine then. I guess you could say 2 units, and then when the ADU goes back, because there may be other parts of the zoning ordinance that need to be changed too, and this we'll just flag that as one of those.
So that's what I was saying to begin with, is that since we don't know what the ADU is going to be, we just have to bite the bullet and say we'll adopt a new 6 or propose a new 6C now, and then sometime in the future we'll have to revise it to be consistent with the accessory dwelling unit ordinance whenever that's adopted.
There's one other comment, and this is Andy. There's one other comment I'd like to add about the ADU amendment. Part of the reason why, at least, and the councilors are welcome to propose ordinance changes. Obviously, planning board can recommend things like that to the council. One of the reasons why I am not comfortable just yet suggesting that we change or incorporate the zoning change for accessory dwelling units is because a couple of days ago, we've had discussions with the city engineer. They're having another assessment done of the city's water capacity and I guess the sewer capacity as well. I'm not familiar with all the details of their study, but one of the concerns I'd like to make sure we're taking into account properly is when we think about growth and build out of the city, everything becomes finite at some point. So we can't, for instance, depend on infinite, future growth for our fiscal, viability of the city. We have to at some point assume there's going to be a end to growth. The water supply is also limited at some point. Now, I think prior studies might have suggested there's adequate capacity into some point into the future, but that apparently is being reassessed now by the Department of Public Services. So one of the things I would like to make sure at least is if the council is going to adopt something that it allows accessory dwelling units, and if we, at least the planning office, are going to recommend or support something like that, I'd like to make sure that wherever we're accounting for growth, whether it be the 40R district or Waterfront West or infill development, that we're not suddenly ballooning the potential there that would exceed what is actually we're capable of supporting. So I'd like to hear a little bit more before recommending, or seeing amendments adopted that might allow an onslaught of, other types of units, just making sure that we're not creating other problems down the road. So.
Well, if you look at the language that we actually had in the draft from Rick, it did say that you could convert a garage or a carriage house, and it had limits. It said, in such case, the converted building shall not be increased in height nor expanded outward other than by dormers, porches, or decks, and not exceeding 300 square feet in total. I don't know about that 300 square feet in total, but that effectively says you're not creating, your second unit is actually that conversion. And we're not saying anything about having an accessory dwelling unit. And we could just be silent on that in the 6C.
I wouldn't hold up accessory dwelling units while still, allowing all other development, because it might, tap our water supply. I just think accessory dwelling units are a great idea and we should move ahead with it, particularly since the water issue is not even quantified.
Can I just ask, are they allowed in all residential, with what's proposed about the ADUs, would they be allowed in all residential areas, even in single family?
See, this gets into the details of it that Andy doesn't want to talk about.
No, it's not that I don't want to talk about it. It's just we never reached a real consensus, I think, as far as the details of accessory dwelling units with the zoning advisory committee. And of course, as we were trying to package up a whole comprehensive rewrite of the zoning ordinance for the council, which is a monumental project and difficult to finalize when we're being pulled in a million different directions. And it's a lengthy document that requires changes every time you touch one paragraph, another section changes or needs to be adjusted. So the bottom line, I guess, is we never reached a consensus over what those provisions would be, but there wasn't any expectation that I recall that we would be prohibiting accessory dwelling units in a single family district. So as far as I know, the understanding I had anyway was that in the residential districts, those would be allowed. What we needed to figure out was, and again, this is all ultimately up to the council, but the question is, what are we recommending? Is whether or not we will only allow accessory dwelling units in a 2-family district, a 3-family district, the single-family district, or otherwise. I welcome the planning board's thoughts or preferences as far as what that should be, so that if we're going to draft something, we have a good consensus from the start. I think one of the problems I think we've had several times in the past that I've been here is we've started to draft language for things before we've agreed upon conceptually what makes sense and what we agree is the intended result. I think it's preferable if we have those discussions first and come to some agreement rather than drafting something going around in circles. I mean, this 6C discussion, for perspective, has actually been revisited several times in the years that I've been working with the planning board here. And the board has several times has put that aside and then come back to it again. And there's been discussion. Originally, the discussion was whether or not the public benefits were sufficient, whether or not the affordable housing component needed to be spelled out more because the contribution.
But I think in the new draft that Bonnie and Rick have put together, we've kind of taken all that discussion away. I mean, I think the points that have been developed here are what our recommendations are. And we've taken away the affordable, the, you know, all those other issues.
Well, I guess that's the question for the planning board. I mean, those are Rick's bullets. Is the planning board's consensus that this is everything? If so, the office can draft something, but it's not, I don't know whether that's, are you saying that you think is sufficient already? The bullets that Rick put
This is
together?
Don. If it's okay, I apologize for it, but you're right. It's obviously not everyone's opinion. I'm of the opinion, and I think I've shared that before, which was a question actually, and I guess it has been clarified, Rick, is when I saw the one section where it says permanent preservation restriction on existing historical significant building. So I think what I'm hearing now is confirming my interpretation that if there was no historically significant building, then they can do a 6C without any other compensation. And I appreciate what Alden had said one time, well, you get some incremental tax-based revenue, but perhaps I'm just more of the financial person, and I personally am not in favor of this unless there is some other carve-outs. If it's not historical preservation, I think there was agreement that the open space is a bit nebulous, but surely some type of funding component. And I understand then you get into the issue of quantification where historical preservation is binary, but nonetheless, I actually am not in favor of this as it's written. But hey, I get it. You just need a majority. So thank you for listening.
No, that's not true, Don. You're bringing up legitimate concerns, and I think we need to consider it. So what you're saying is, if there were a building that was eligible for permanent restriction, preservation restriction, that would suffice as a benefit. But if there isn't, we need to consider something else.
Well,
So
that's
that the
what Rick, right, exactly. Rick has written, if it's historic preservation, that suffices. But what's not addressed is if it's not a historical building or city, if it's what happens then. And I think what I just heard is my interpretation is you just passed the 6C. And I personally, as you just said, Bonnie, I think there should be some incremental benefit to the city.
Okay, so let's figure out what that might be.
Assuming you guys agree, maybe you guys are okay without any other benefit. It's you know, just my thought.
Are there others who feel the same way Don does?
I'm not opposed to it. I just can't, I don't know what other benefit there would be. You know, unless you're asking, unless it's a simple matter of making a monetary contribution to the city of some sort, but you know, some kind of extraction like that. But I'm not sure. I don't know what it would be that would be related to the development that you would ask for.
Rick, if I may address that, I think in one sense, perhaps the analogy is incorrect, and you and Tanya have more experience. But again, as a developer who used to contribute to cities and communities when I was building opiate power plants, not commercial structures, et cetera, there's development. I mean, you're paying for fire trucks. You're providing some type of development funding. It's, in my opinion, it's no different than in Boston, and they're getting some type of contribution for whatever it is. And you could classify, categorize it, name it what you want. The bottom line is there's some extra benefit, albeit monetary, to the city. You're right. So you hit the nail on the head, Rick.
So maybe it's a contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund, you know, and it's a substantial one.
Doesn't this imply that we're allowing them to do a 6C? I thought the whole idea was that we were going to allow 6Cs in situations where we thought that improved the property, where we thought it was a good design and where it actually made sense to do it, rather than accept the notion that we're going to let them do it. It's going to sort of compromise the lot. So as a penalty for compromising the lot, you're going to give the city some money, or, you know, I thought we were going to base this on somehow try and structure this so that it was only done in situations where it made sense from a design or planning perspective.
So if we were to look back at the one we just approved and hypothesize that that building was not historic, would we want to approve that? Or or would we want to say that we will only let that second building be built on the other street if we get something else out of it? I guess that's the basic
Are
question.
you talking about the one that, can you remember? The one down
342.
The Merrimack.
Merrimack Street and Merrimack Court, the one behind.
Right. Yeah. Well, for me, that was a situation where that from a design perspective made sense. There was an empty lot. It faced a street all on its own. I mean, it seemed like a single family belonged there.
That was the reason that I proposed not asking for anything else, because I wouldn't want to put obstacles in the way of that type of development. I guess that's my concern.
Well, we did get a historic restriction on that property. And to me, that's a big plus. That's a very visible site on Merrimack Street. We got a lot of nice historic buildings there. They're gonna take an addition off and restore it. I just think our history with historic architecture in our city is well worth preserving by those kinds of restrictions.
And I don't see any problem with that. What we're trying to figure out is if that house had not been historic, with the findings that we have proposed here, that it fits the neighborhood, it's got frontage on its own street, it's a good infill, is that good enough? Or as Don is suggesting, this is a special permit. You should have to do something other than just make a nice house on the lot and get a financial benefit for it for free.
Is that generally our rule about special permits? Is that to get a special permit, you have to?
Yeah, Leah, I'm glad you asked that question. Can I just clarify, for those board members who aren't intimately familiar with this particular section of the ordinance, this ordinance is really saying two things. It's calling for the planning board to look at the typical special permit criteria about, is it appropriate, right, in the neighborhood, in the context? Is there some sort of impact on the neighborhood? And then also, is there a public benefit? And the typical public benefits for 6Cs over the years, and it's called out in the ordinance, the typical categories are open space contributions, which I think there have been very few of those. There's only been a handful, maybe one or two really. The affordable housing component, which again has been limited. We haven't really seen many wholesale units created. There's been, discussion of maybe a couple $1,000s here or there, but that's been limited in terms of contributions from 6Es. And then there's been the historic preservation one, which is the most common one. I think more recently we've seen a lot of folks saying, we'll go to the historic commission, get them to confirm that the building is historic and is worthy of a preservation restriction. And then they circle back with the planning board and say, we've got, a public benefit here. Will you give us a 6C special permit? So
but we've also recently turned those down when we thought that it was not in keeping with the neighborhood like the other one on Merrimack Street.
Exactly, which is why it is two things.
So we have the right to determine even beyond the preservation. I guess to answer the question, if that last one we didn't have the historic building, it was another building, I would have still wanted that. It just made so much sense. You had two different streets going there. It wasn't, the infill, one house behind it. It just made a lot of sense to me, and I would not have required a public benefit. The fact that we got a historic preservation restriction out of it, I think it's a huge plus. But to say, okay, if you're going to do this, you've got to throw $50,000 in the Affordable Housing Trust. I don't know how you measure that. But that's just me.
Yeah, what I was thinking was, I probably didn't put the language right on it when I said you have to give us something in return. I think about the other special permits we have. So open space residential development. They get to cluster all these houses together and get more housing, and then have open space. And the city gets the open space because almost all of them, there are a few exceptions, there's public access to that open space. So there's a quote unquote benefit designed into that special permit. Well, the overlay district is a special permit. We're already preserving, historic character downtown. So that's where I got the idea that a special permit is special, that you have to meet certain criteria. And up to this point, we've been asking for something in return. As long as those criteria are clearly stated, because they were there all along, we just haven't been using them very well because we've been so focused on the benefit. Unless we can come up with a benefit that's related to the land development, something that they're doing and we want to encourage for the city, I guess I'm going to back off the need for a benefit other than historic preservation. And we just have to have some sort of if somebody comes up with a brainstorm on that before we submit this for consideration for adoption, we go with it with the findings.
Can we, and I should know this and I don't, can we request a contribution to the Community Preservation Trust, like to the, because that actually has open space, affordable housing, and historic as part of their mission.
You're talking about the CPC, Community Preservation, that's a tax on the city.
Yeah, I know, and they don't take donation. There's not a separate, I don't know that.
Yeah, additional funds can be added into that account. I mean, it is, you could work with a developer who proposes to provide funds into that versus for affordable housing, certainly, if you wanted to amend the ordinance to explicitly call that out. But yeah, that right now the ordinance says a clear public benefit derived from the proposed project, including but not limited to, and then it lists those three things I mentioned earlier. So it's not prohibited that they could donate to the CPA funds, which could then be distributed by the council if need be on a project.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that covers the three areas that the ordinance initially had stated. I mean, I think that historic preservation is important, and I think that it's not to say, I agree with Don, there could be, we could also say, I mean, the developer of these sites is getting a significant increase in value on the property by creating 2 single-family homes as opposed to a multifamily, 1 multifamily. So, and maybe it is going to the Affordable Housing Trust if we don't feel like the historic preservation piece is enough, given that that's a big issue in town right now.
Well, that's where it goes. Still doesn't solve the problem of how we create it. What we say it is. Is it a percentage of the development cost? Is it a flat fee that gets reviewed every 2 years? This is where the challenge is, whether it goes to.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. I think a percentage of the value of the property. I mean, and certainly they're increasing the value of property if they're building the second structure. But that would seem to make the most sense instead of a set number.
But how is that evaluated before it's finished?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a recommendation to the city council. So the city, I mean, we could say that, based on, and they could decide sort of what might be the appropriate, whether it is the Community Preservation Fund or whether it's, the Affordable Housing Trust.
No, I'm still trying to differentiate where it goes and what it is. And I don't think we're clear on what it is that we would ask for. Don, did you want to try something on that?
Yeah, I think I did send it to Rick, but it probably didn't get distributed to the rest of the planning board when Rick was drafting something up. And with respect to what it is, and MJ, it's not perfect, but what I said it would be, and we'll get to the percentage, and I think I put 5 or 10% bracketed of the original property value 2 years previous. So there was no necessarily gaming of appealing a decision, a tax or something like that. So I was trying to also circumvent someone trying to game the system. So I took, to your point, MJ, it was the assessed value. And I threw out, 5% or something like that. So on a $700,000, maybe that's too big. So on a $700,000 assessed value, you're going to put a second structure. It's probably worth another $700,000 my guess is the developer is going to make a couple $100,000. Maybe I'm way off base. And it was 5%, that'd be $35,000. So, you know, we get a third, he gets 2/3. And I agree, one could argue that that's risk-adjusted returns, which are different. But I was just throwing a number out there and for everyone to comment on. But that's kind of where my head was at, MJ.
It seems if it's related to the property value, that makes the most sense. You know, the assessed value is always different than the appraised value, of course, but,
right.
You know, I mean, you can't ask for an appraisal, so you have to go with the assessed value, I assume, if that's the direction.
And for clarification, because I'm really slow when it comes to all this number stuff, assessed value of the property once the second structure is on it, right?
That's what's hard to figure out, I would think.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, exactly. How do you come up with assessed value of the property? John, you made some fast tap dancing there.
Well,
Slow
yeah,
down
so,
for me.
To make it simple, I was suggesting the assessed value of the original property before the 6C. To keep it simple, and it was assessed, so we don't know how to ask for an appraisal. It's factual. And assuming one even agrees, then the only, I think, thing we would debate is percentage. I threw out 5%. Maybe that's too high, that's too low, but I don't know. That's what I just was thinking about, guys.
And was that going towards the affordable housing, or did you say, John?
So Alden, I was first trying to address Bonnie's question of water, whatever, but to your point, yes, I personally am a big advocate of affordable housing. I have no idea when we get the ADUs, and as we all know, the 6Cs are not ADUs. They're separate standalone, you know, not the medium, you know, very, very high level houses. So my thought would be the affordable, Alden, yeah.
Right. So one question I had trying to think about that is that if we had a development come in and we said, okay, we'll let you do this development, but you have to provide a certain percentage of it as affordable housing, then what normally is that percentage that is commonly looked at? Is that a known thing?
Yeah, I think it's what, Bonnie, 1 in 9?
What are we talking about?
1 in 6.
If
1 in 6? Okay, thank you, Leah.
One in 6?
Yeah, no, a big development, yes. After 6 units, you have to give one affordable unit, because the idea is that they have made enough money on those other units that they can afford to put in an affordable one. The problem with the 6C is we never get that because you've only got 2 units, and they would lose their shirts if the second one were affordable. That's where
But maybe then if it's 1 in 6, then maybe the amount should be 1/6 of a cost of building an affordable unit as the cost. If you're trying to say, you know, that's what a developer would do. So if we have you know, so that if we end up with 6 buildings that are 6C, then you can afford to build an affordable unit.
No, it doesn't. I don't understand. Are you just using that as an example? Because the 6C is for 2 units on 1 parcel.
Right, but if you're saying they have to make a contribution to the affordable housing, then
ratio, basically.
Yeah, the ratio. Well, all he was saying is 5% too big or not, but it sounds like if you're requiring a developer to, once he has 6, then he has to have 1 affordable. Then if you have a developer building an additional unit, then it sounds like you would require him to pay 1/6 of the cost of building an affordable unit.
1/6 of the cost of the new structure.
No, of building an affordable unit. So it maybe, so maybe it's a percentage of his cost. All I'm saying, I'm trying to get some comparable measure to a developer. So you're developing, you know, 1 additional unit with this lot, and try to compare it to a larger development where you're requiring affordable housing. That's why I was just trying to determine some sort of measure based on that.
Yeah, and isn't there, I mean, if they don't build it, can't they contribute for the cost for offsite with a larger development? And
We're talking about inclusionary zoning. I think they have to build, I'm pretty sure they have to build it, right, Andy?
The unit?
Yeah, and if you do an inclusionary unit, if you do an inclusionary zoning, which is what we're talking about.
The inclusionary ordinance was, put in there basically to make sure that developers couldn't just, pay out a small amount of funds, because part of the problem the city has is there's mobilization costs for trying to get those units built for us. So if the developer's already out there, there's an efficiency for them to build that additional unit. Whereas if they give us a percentage of that cost, or what they see as the net difference between the market rate and the affordable, it's actually not enough for us to do that, because we have to mobilize for a construction project, and it's not spread over the rest of the project. So.
Yeah, but is there an assumed cost for what a unit would, what a unit of affordable housing would cost to build? Is there a number?
That's very hard to measure.
Well, that's driven really by market, so it's hard to.
Site development, land costs, it depends on the project. Yeah. I think Don's approach is the simplest and makes a lot of sense. I guess I have a suggestion. I think we keep going round and round and round on 6Cs, and I thought we were in agreement to throw out the public benefit except for historic preservation. But if that's not the case, maybe a couple of people could get together, maybe Don, you could be one of them, to rework these bullet points, because I don't think we're at a consensus anymore.
Let's first see how many people really think it's important that we move beyond findings and the option to always have a requirement that we always have a preservation restriction if a historic house is under consideration. So let's go back to Don's premise. Is he the only one who seriously would like to see benefit for other situations, in addition to the findings that it meets all the criteria for neighborhood and character and all of that? Who else is with Don and really feels that that's necessary to have a further benefit?
This is Tanya. I think that historic preservation is important. I think that these other issues are important too. So, and they were put in this ordinance for a reason, and so I'd be okay with preserving it in some way, some type of public benefit. So I would think if we're going to have historic preservation in there, we should look at the other ones as well. So I think it either should be we don't have any public benefit, including historic preservation, or if we are, then we include, we keep the other two pieces, or drop open space and just have affordable housing and historic preservation.
Knowing that affordable housing would have to be a contribution because it couldn't be built in most cases.
Yeah, and I think that it'd be okay. I would, and that might help actually to have a contribution. I think I would probably, I think we should maybe look to see what other communities are. I would say it's usually, I feel like it's maybe usually under 5%, so maybe like somewhere around 2 to 3%, if you're talking about of the assessed value.
Would you and Don want to spend some time on this?
I'm happy to work with Don on it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's see what you come up with. Just looking at this little piece of it.
Yeah, my thought on that is, I would forget open space. A, we have a ton of it, and B, CPA funds it every year regardless. So I like the idea of the historic preservation or affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I would stick with having all three of them as options. Just, maybe we haven't had a case where the open space makes sense, but I would think there could be. And I think, part of what we were trying to do, I think, was tighten up and not feel like in every case that there was a benefit, we needed to approve these, right? And to, you know, have some more restrictions on when it makes sense, or more explanation of when we're likely to approve them. But I don't know why we would need to knock out the benefits. I think we can do both, have the benefits and tighten it up.
So Beth, let me push back on you. We've been working on a percentage contribution to give the developer an option for affordable housing. You're thinking the same thing should be done for open space, but where would we put that money? Put it into CPA money?
Right, or I mean, if someone is willing to put a restriction on property that they own, commit to something, I would think that something like that in exchange.
Right, so you're saying that
an
you could have like a, you know, what if there's an area where you could build a park, or maybe there's a connection that could be made to the rail trail, or, you know, so there could be something they could do, and we just don't know based on the site. So there could be something. So it might be, you know, it might not be a contribution. It actually could just be that they're creating, because isn't that what the one over on Crow's Lane, like over, or it's not called Crow's Lane anymore, but Colby Farm Lane, like that property is doing green space, right? That's part of their public benefit.
That's an open space development, so that's a different feature.
It is, but I'm just saying that there could be options like that with 6C.
Right, but I think, I guess if you were to, my concern is that, you know, having things that are, clearly we want to have, if there's a historic building, we want it preserved. That's a, as Don said, that's a binary thing. So then the other question is, what are the other things? I don't think we have anything else that we've defined that is a real binary thing like that. So, and I also have a concern that if we say that somebody with a historic building gets away with it by putting a preservation restriction on their building, which is essentially not very much of a cost at all, but we have a substantial cost for somebody who doesn't have a historic building, I think we run into trouble of treating similar applicants unequally. And so if we were going to ask for a financial contribution of any sort, I would expect it to be asked of anybody who gets a 6C, and I would still require historic preservation restriction on the building. And I just don't have the, I mean, I like Don's suggestion, if we're going to have a financial contribution, I like Don's suggestion for its simplicity, that there's no question, somebody coming in looks at their assessment from 2 years ago and can, you know, do the math and figure out what the contribution is, and they can decide whether it's worth it for them to come in and apply for a 6C. I think that we run into trouble when we have, you know, somebody might be required to provide 5 acres of open space, and somebody else might be required to, you know, put a certain amount into a housing fund, and somebody else might be able to just, as you say, make a connection to a rail trail. I think that it's treating people very unequally.
And you could just have a percentage, Rick, to like something like the Community Preservation Fund, which covers all of those. And then I think
that's the thing. So if you take Don's suggestion and say it goes to the Community Preservation Fund, and everybody has to do it, then that's fine. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I would think it would reduce the number of 6Cs we get, but we don't get that many.
And I think I would be okay with that. I think I agree with you, Rick, that a preservation restriction is you know, it doesn't really mean much because the developer is selling the property anyway, so it doesn't mean much to them. So maybe it's just that you need a preservation restriction and this.
Yep.
So
I think if you and Don want to draft a suggestion for that we could add on to this, and we can decide whether we want to move forward with that.
Okay.
All right, homework assignment. See, it does pay to go in circles. We're good. I know he's busy. I'm a little hungry, but besides that, I don't think we're busy. I think we've come up with, I mean, we haven't closed it yet, and we'll understand better when they come up with the rationale for the percentage, if it's something we can live with. But I think we've made progress. I think this is good.
I think we're 95% of the way there on the actual language of the ordinance too, so
Yeah.
we're close.
Okay, and we'll just leave the ADU until the powers that be want to deal with it or ask us for our opinion. I mean, we could have a session like this on that ordinance too, starting with the bullet points, but I don't want to do that now. And I don't want it to get mixed in with 6C. So let's put 6C to bed, and then we'll see if anybody thinks our planning capability is good enough that we could handle accessory dwelling units sooner rather than later. How's
Good.
that?
Great.
Makes it work for
Yep,
ourselves.
good idea.
Okay, so Donna and Tanya, do you want to set a date for when you want to come back to see us? Sorry, I'm treating you like applicants.
No,
When do you
sure.
think you might be able to give us some ideas on what you've been thinking about? Do you want to do that the first meeting in September? It's a month away.
Tanya, I'm okay with that, and I'll give you a call or vice versa, and we can figure. And I don't mind doing the grunt work, Tanya. I'm the retired guy, and you've got a job and a parent, so and you point me in the direction. I'll plumb where you tell me to plumb.
Okay, all right, well, yeah, so Don and I will do that, and we'll get something back by the first meeting in September. That should be fine, so.
Great. You're on. We don't even need a motion for that. We're just gonna take you at your word. It says potential zoning amendment, so I'm gonna put 6C on for that one. Okay. Any other updates from, not from me anyway, anything from the planning director?
No, thanks. I did, I appreciate the discussion tonight on these, the 6C ordinance. I mean, one thing I have talked to at least one counselor about the possibility of sponsoring a zoning amendment. We talk about planning issues, and a planning issue that the city I think has is whether or not to allow further growth on the island, Plum Island. And so one of the things I'm suggesting that the city officials revisit is whether or not it makes sense to change the zoning to be more consistent with what the original intention, I think, of that was supposed to be out there years ago when the sewer system was extended, which was to limit growth. And so I would argue that it's not in the city's best interest to continue to allow the type of growth that's happened out there on a continuing basis. So I'm recommending that basically that's something that the council should consider. The water sewer department should weigh in on as far as whether or not they want to allow more bedrooms out there and so forth. Because there really hasn't been a curbing of the growth out there as I think was originally intended. That is one issue that I'd like to see focus on in the coming months, in addition to all the, of course, other issues that are high priority to others. The short-term rental units is one right now that's that needs to be processed and adopted in some format by the council with the planning board's input. But that Plum Island piece, I think, is one that, while we're dealing with all these neighborhood contextual things, I think it's also important for us to think about sustainability and whether or not it makes sense with sea level rise and storm surge increases in the coming years. Just as I think we need to protect our treatment plant as the most vulnerable low-lying facility we have in the city, I think we also need to consider whether or not it really makes sense to continue to allow the type of growth and development that's happening on the island. I mean, some of the smaller homes out there are becoming quite large. So that's one thing I would put across your radar if you have thoughts on that.
Okay, I've got one update. Just a reminder, tomorrow night, Rick and I are participating in the short-term rental unit subcommittee or working group. And that is going to be, revised amendment is going to be brought forward for a joint public hearing on August 19th. My sense is that we just might be discussing it that night. I can't promise you that we would put it off. I think they're very eager to get this out of the council and onto the floor for us to have this joint public hearing. I don't know how much lead time you're going to have to review the revised document. I will push for, the usual week before, but that would mean next Wednesday. It would have to be submitted because we only have 2 weeks till the next meeting. So
It really should be posted right in advance so the public can see it before it goes to the public hearing.
that's right, it needs 14 days. So if it's on the agenda, Andy, has it been posted?
Just to be clear, the zoning hearing is something that's required to be advertised. The new version of that, it can still come out of working session. So this is a continued public hearing. We re-advertised it because we felt it had been a long time. The COVID situation came into play. So that has been re-advertised for that, what is it, the 19th. But the new version of it that is a working document that comes out of that prior process does not require another notice, if that's the question.
But Andy, we have a new document that we're discussing. So does that new document dated July 22nd, is that what is being advertised, or is it the original one back from way back when?
Yeah, just to be clear again, the advertisement in the paper is not verbatim the ordinance that's proposed. It's just a summary of what is being discussed, the scope of what is being discussed in the zoning amendment. So, you wouldn't advertise the entire zoning ordinance if you were adopting a new ordinance. What we do is we summarize the scope of what's being discussed. That way the public, if they're interested in that scope, can come and look at the details in greater detail.
But typically, I mean, it's common practice to give the public an advanced look at what you're discussing. Is that?
Well, I agree. I agree with that completely. I mean, certainly whatever time you as members feel you need, I think you may need to say, we haven't had enough time to review that. That's up to you. I'm just trying to distinguish between what's statutorily required versus what you may feel is appropriate, which I would agree with.
Actually, what I was referring to was the fact that there's a document out there that I'm not sure the public knows about. So wouldn't it be helpful for the public hearing, for the public to know about that document?
Well, I agree with that, but I think the intention of the counselors who had edited it most recently and basically forwarded it to this working group, the intention there was to come back out of that working group with a cleaner version, potentially other revisions that might have been made to that before sending it out to everybody. Again, for context with these zoning amendments, because they can take quite a while and a lot of process, the goal, it would be preferable if we work out ideally what we're trying to accomplish first, what the goals and the issues are we're trying to resolve. The counselors, certainly we could post on the website right now the working document that the working group is looking at tomorrow evening. I'm not sure that would make a whole lot of sense because it creates yet another version that's out there that's probably going to be revised the day after based on feedback from that working group meeting. So I don't disagree. I'd love to have the transparency, have everything out there in the entire process, but I think the intention there was to try to minimize confusion at the next meeting. I don't want to speak for the counselors, but I think the intention was to try to minimize the confusion by having a updated version that addressed as many issues as possible, working with that sort of core stakeholder group, not to preclude anybody from seeing that draft, but just that I don't know if it makes sense from their perspective to post that on the website and say, this is the new working version, when it's not clear yet that is the one that has been put forward by everybody. But again, the counselors are certainly welcome. We can certainly post that, information. I don't know if that was the intention until after the working group meeting, which happens to be tomorrow night. So
yeah, that would be the idea.
What I was saying. I was saying that
exactly.
Shouldn't whatever comes out of the working group meeting be posted in advance so the public can see it, because that's what we're going to be discussing at the meeting.
I agree. I think that's the intention. The question will be, is there clear enough consensus tomorrow night from the working group that those edits could be made and then, published early next week or something? I don't know, but that'll be up to the counselors to decide based on the working group's progress.
All right, for discussion tomorrow night, I just made the same note to myself to make sure that, they understand that the public will be coming, and the planning board and anybody else who wants to review whatever we come up with tomorrow night, without being able to see it, they're very much hamstrung in how they can comment on it. They'll have to just listen. I mean, we'll have to have a really detailed presentation of it if there's nothing on the website as a result of tomorrow night's discussion. Yeah. Okay, well, you know what our constraints are. This one is being driven by the counselors, and we'll do the best we can to get the information out before the public hearing, but be prepared for there to be a public hearing, a joint public hearing on it at our next meeting. Okay, any other questions, comments? announcements? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that
So-
motion.
Who was that, Tanya?
Yep.
Okay, who's the second?
Second, Alden?
Okay, Alden. And we'll go through the roll call. Alden,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank
5
you.
minutes to 10.
Bonnie.
Thank you.
Good work. See you soon. Good night.
Night.
Right.